You know that sinking feeling. You're standing over a simple little wedge shot, 60 yards from the flag. Nothing between you and the green but short grass and a good swing. And you already know you might blow it. Sometimes you catch it fat and it dribbles 30 feet. Sometimes you catch it thin and it screams over the green into trouble. Same swing, you think, same club, totally different result. I lived in that misery for years. And here's the thing I finally figured out. The thing nobody told me. It was never my swing. It was one small setup mistake I was making before the club ever moved. One weird little tweak fixed it almost overnight. I want to be honest with you. I thought this was nonsense when I first heard it. I'd spent real money on lessons and new wedges, chasing crisp contact, and some old-timer at my home course told me I had it backwards. I laughed him off. I was wrong. By the end of this, I'm going to hand you a technique that traces straight back to a man named Paul Runyan and a little book he wrote in 1979. A technique that world-class short game players quietly used while the rest of us were sold something else entirely. And I promise you this works with the exact clubs already sitting in your garage right now. You don't need to buy a single thing. But before I give you the tweak, you have to understand why you keep losing shots, and roughly what those lost shots have been costing you. Let me start with the mistake, because I made it for the better part of a decade without ever knowing it. Here's the belief almost every amateur carries. You've heard it 100 times. Hit down on the ball. Ball back in your stance, hands pressed forward, lean the shaft toward the target, and trap that ball against the turf with a steep, descending blow. It sounds right. It sounds aggressive and professional, and it is quietly ruining your wedge game. I remember the exact afternoon I started to doubt it. I was on the practice green at a little municipal course near me, late on a Tuesday, nobody around, hitting the same 50-yard shot over and over. Fat, thin, and an older gentleman, maybe 75, watched me for a while without saying a word. Then he walked over, looked at my setup, and said just 4 words. "You're choking the bounce." I had no idea what he meant. I didn't even know my wedge had a thing called bounce. That afternoon cracked open something I'd been getting wrong for years, and I'm going to walk you through the whole thing. Because here's what that mistake actually does. When you shove your hands way forward and lean the shaft hard at the target, you take a club that was engineered to glide across the ground and you turn its front edge into a knife. That sharp leading edge now points straight down into the turf. So one of two things happens every single time. Either the edge digs into the ground behind the ball and you catch it fat and the shot comes up 30 feet short. Or, terrified of digging, your body instinctively lifts at the last second to avoid it, the edge catches the middle of the ball and you blade it clean across the green. Fat or thin, it's the same root cause. You've disabled the one part of the club that was designed to save you. And I want you to sit with what that has actually cost you, because this is the part nobody adds up. Think about how many rounds you've played where 2, 3, 4 shots got thrown away inside 100 yards. Not on the tough shots, on the easy ones, the little wedges you should get up and down in your sleep. Those are the strokes that quietly wreck your score. Those are the ones that keep you stuck at the same handicap for 10 years, and every single one of them is a small tax you've been paying on a mistake you didn't even know you were making. I added mine up once, roughly, over a season. I figured I was giving away at least 2 shots a round to poor wedge contact. Over 40 rounds, that's 80 shots. 80. I had paid a teaching professional $40 an hour trying to find 80 shots, and they were sitting right there in a setup flaw the whole time. So the question becomes, what is the bounce, and why does leaning the shaft forward kill it? And to understand that, I have to take you back to 1932, to a man who solved this exact problem with a soldering iron and an airplane. Because here's the part that genuinely surprised me. The fix for your fat and thin wedges was invented almost 100 years ago. And then, slowly, the golf world talked you out of using it. His name was Gene Sarazen. If you follow the game at all, you know him. He's one of only a handful of players in history to win all 4 major championships. But in the early 1930s, Sarazen had a problem that will sound very familiar to you. He couldn't trust himself out of the sand, and he couldn't trust his short shots. The clubs of that era had thin, sharp, straight soles. They dug. They dug exactly the way your leading edge digs when you press your hands forward today. Now here's the part I love, because it's true and almost nobody knows it. Sarazen had taken up flying. He spent time around airplanes, and he was fascinated by how a plane got off the ground. He noticed how the pilot would adjust the tail, how the back of the aircraft dropped and the nose lifted, and that angle is what let the whole machine rise into the air instead of plowing forward. And he had a thought. What if a golf club could do the same thing? What if, instead of a sharp edge that dug down, he could add a wide, angled flange to the back of the sole, a piece of metal that hung lower than the leading edge, so the club would skid and lift through the sand and turf instead of burying itself. So he did it himself. He took a niblick, what we'd call a wedge today, and he soldered lead onto the back of the sole to build that flange. He experimented in his workshop until he had a club with a rounded, lowered back edge. That angle, the amount the back of the sole sits below the sharp front edge, is what we now call bounce. He kept it a bit of a secret at first. He debuted it at the British Open, the Open Championship, in 1932 at Prince's in England. He won. Then he took the same idea and won the US Open that same year. 1932, 2 majors, with a club he'd built on a workbench because he was tired of digging. That flange, that bounce, is on your sand wedge right now. It's on your pitching wedge. It's on that gap wedge you paid $150 for. The most brilliant short game invention of the 20th century is already sitting in your bag. And here's the gut punch. Most amateurs, through the way they set up, switch it off on every single shot. Think about that. Sarazen spends months solving the digging problem, wins 2 majors proving it, and 90 years later the average weekend golfer presses his hands so far forward that the leading edge points down into the dirt again, recreating the exact problem Sarazen fixed in 1932. So how did we get talked out of it? That's where it gets interesting, and that's where I stopped feeling stupid and started feeling a little angry. Because I don't think you forgot about the bounce by accident. I think you were quietly sold away from it. Here's what happened over the last few decades. The golf equipment business figured out something. They can't sell you a swing. They can't easily sell you a setup adjustment. But they can absolutely sell you a club. So the marketing shifted, year after year, toward gear. New wedges every season. Higher lofts. 60 degrees, 62 degrees, 64 degrees. Sharper, more aggressive-looking soles marketed to better players. And here's the quiet trick. A lot of those premium wedges everyone chases come with very low bounce. Low bounce looks clean and professional in the shop. But low bounce is the least forgiving option there is for a regular golfer with a normal swing. It's a club built for a tour professional who strikes the turf perfectly every time. In your hands, on a normal Saturday, low bounce digs. So you buy the club the pros use, thinking it'll make you better. It makes contact harder. You struggle, you catch a few fat, you blade a few. And what do you conclude? You conclude you need another lesson, or another new wedge next season, and around it goes. You keep paying. Nobody's going to run an ad telling you the fix is free and it's a setup change you can make in your driveway tonight. There's no money in that. There's a fortune in selling you the 6th wedge you didn't need. I fell for all of it. I owned 5 wedges at one point. 5. I could have owned 2 good ones and spent the rest learning to use the bounce that was already there. So let's get to the tweak. This is the thing that old gentleman meant when he said I was choking the bounce, and once I understood it, my contact changed in a single practice session. The weird tweak is this: stop pressing your hands forward. Stop leaning the shaft hard at the target on your normal wedge shots. I know. It feels wrong. Everything in modern instruction screams the opposite at you, and the first time you try it, it'll feel like you're going to hit it thin. That's the doubt I had too. Trust me for the next few minutes. Here's exactly what I do now, and exactly how I set it up. For a standard wedge shot, say 30 to 70 yards, I start with the ball in the middle of my stance, roughly under my sternum, maybe a hair forward of center. Not way back by my right foot the way I was taught for years. Center. Then, and this is the key, I set the shaft close to vertical. The handle sits over the ball, or barely ahead of it, pointing up toward the middle of my body, not jammed out toward my lead pocket. When I look down, the club is sitting flat on the ground, and I can actually see that back part of the sole, the flange, resting on the grass. The leading edge is not stabbing down into the turf. The whole sole is kissing the ground. That's it. That's the tweak. You've just rearmed the bounce that Sarazen built in 1932. Now here's why it works. In plain terms, when the club is set neutral like this, and you make your swing, the wide back of the sole hits the turf first and skids. It bounces, exactly like it's supposed to, exactly like the name says. Instead of the edge digging a trench behind the ball, the sole slides along the ground and gathers the ball off the turf clean. The margin for error gets enormous. You can hit slightly behind the ball and the club just skids into it instead of chunking. The forgiveness you've been chasing was engineered into the club the whole time. The second piece is grip pressure. When that gentleman said I was choking the club, he meant it 2 ways. I was choking the bounce by leaning the shaft, and I was literally strangling the grip. When you grip a wedge too tight, your wrists lock, the face stops releasing, and the club can't do its job. I went from squeezing at about a 9 out of 10 to maybe a 4. Light hands. Let the weight of the head fall and swing through. If you're nodding along right now, staring at that row of wedges in your bag that you keep buying and never trusting, then you already know the problem was never the club. It was the setup nobody bothered to fix. That's exactly what the Complete Golf Fix system lays out for you, in plain PDFs you can read tonight. The first fix walks you through diagnosing exactly where your shots are leaking strokes, gives you a 15-second grip audit that changes your ball flight right away, and shows you the setup adjustments tour players use that amateurs like us never hear about. And if you want to go deeper, Precision Golf decodes your misses so you finally understand what your ball flight is really telling you. Here's something you can test for free before you spend a dime, tonight, in your own home. Grab your wedge, set it flat on the floor the way I described, hands centered, shaft standing tall, and just look down. If you can see that back part of the sole resting on the ground, you've just proven to yourself that the bounce was there all along, exactly like the book promises. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. And here's the honest truth about why now matters. Every round you play with the wrong setup is a tax you're already paying, whether you fix it or not. But before you go anywhere, stay with me, because setting up neutral creates one brand new problem, and it's the one that tripped me up next. The very first time I did this, on that same practice green, I hit 10 shots in a row that felt like nothing, like I'd barely touched them, and every one of them nipped off the turf with a soft little thump and checked up near the pin. It felt too easy. I actually laughed out loud, alone on that green, because for years I'd been fighting the club that was built to help me. But here's the new problem this created, and I want to be straight with you about it, because it's the thing that tripped me up next. Once you set up neutral and let the bounce work, you have to stop trying to lift the ball into the air, and that fear of thinning it, that instinct to help the ball up, is the single hardest habit to break. So let me show you how to kill it for good, and I'm going to show you how to do it without a single lesson, without a launch monitor, and without leaving your house. Because I know exactly who's watching this. Some of you can't just drive out to a range whenever you feel like it. Maybe there isn't one close. Maybe the lessons cost more than you want to spend, and honestly, after everything I've told you, why would you pay for someone to undo the very habit that's hurting you? So this next part is for the person working with what they already have. A little bit of floor space. The clubs in your bag. Maybe a spare room, a garage, or a patch of backyard. That's all you need, and I mean that. Here's the first drill, and it costs nothing. Take a wedge and stand on a hard, flat surface. Your garage floor, a patio, a wood floor with a towel down if you're worried about scuffing. No ball. I want you to set up in that neutral position I described, shaft vertical, hand centered, sole flat on the ground. Now make slow, smooth swings and let the sole of the club slap the floor. Not the edge, the flat of the sole. You'll hear it. A dull thump instead of a sharp click. On a hard floor, if you've got your hands jammed forward, the leading edge catches and the club jars in your hands. You feel it instantly. But when you set it neutral and let the bounce lead, the sole slides and thumps clean. That sound, that feel, is the exact contact you want on the course. 20 of those a day, standing in your garage, and your hands start to learn the position without you even thinking about it. I did these while I waited for the coffee to brew. Here's the second one, and this is the one that fixed my fear of thinning it. Take an old towel, fold it into a long strip, and lay it flat on the ground about 6 inches behind your ball, out away from the target. Now hit little pitch shots and try to miss the towel. If you're pressing your hands forward and chopping down, the club bottoms out early and you'll clip that towel behind the ball, and you'll know it. When you set up neutral and let the bounce skid, the club stays shallow and glides right over the towel into the ball. The towel gives you instant, honest feedback with no gadget and no cost. You can do this in the backyard with plastic practice balls if you don't want to hit real ones. It works exactly the same. The lesson isn't in the ball flight, it's in whether you touch the towel. And here's a third thing, purely for feel, that you can do sitting in your living room chair while you watch television. Hold a wedge out in front of you and just let it hang. Feel the weight of the head. Now waggle it back and forth with almost no grip pressure, letting the head swing freely on its own weight. That sensation, the head swinging while your hands stay soft, is the exact feeling you want when you release the club through the ball. Most amateurs never once feel this because they're locked up tight from the second they take their grip. 2 minutes of this in the evening reprograms your hands more than a bucket of range balls hit with the wrong idea. None of this requires money. None of it requires a coach. It requires you to trust the club and undo the one habit that was quietly costing you strokes for years. And I'll tell you, doing these in my own garage, for free, taught me more about crisp contact than the $600 in lessons I'd paid before. But I promised you something specific at the start. I told you there was a technique that traced back to a man named Paul Runyan and a book from 1979. A method the finest short game players used while the rest of us were sold new equipment. This is the part I'd been building toward, and it's the piece that took me from decent contact to genuinely trusting my wedges under pressure. Let me tell you who Paul Runyan was, because his name has been almost completely forgotten, and that is a crime. Paul Runyan was a professional golfer in the 1930s. He was small. He was not a power player. In an era of big hitters, he was one of the shortest drivers on tour, and people underestimated him constantly. They called him Little Poison. Why poison? Because from inside 100 yards and around the greens, he was absolutely lethal. He would out-chip and out-pitch and out-putt men who hit it 50 yards past him, and he'd beat 'em where it counted. And he didn't just win. In 1938, in the final of the PGA Championship, which back then was match play, Paul Runyan faced Sam Snead. Snead was one of the longest, most gifted athletes the game has ever seen, and he was launching drives far beyond anything Runyan could reach. It should have been a slaughter. It was a slaughter, but the other way around. Runyan beat Snead 8-7, one of the most lopsided finals in the history of that championship. He did it entirely with his short game. Little Poison chipped and pitched a longer, stronger man into the ground. So when Paul Runyan finally wrote down exactly how he did it, you'd think the whole golfing world would have memorized every page. The book came out in 1979. It's called The Short Way to Lower Scoring. And here is the secret finale I promised you. The specific thing from that book that changed my wedges for good. Runyan taught that on your touch shots, the little pitches and chips where you need the ball to come off soft and land like a butterfly, the handle of the club should never lead the club head. He wanted the shaft returned to that neutral, slightly upright position through impact, so the loft of the club and the bounce of the club were fully preserved. He described keeping the hands quiet and passive through the strike, letting the design of the club do the work instead of manipulating it. But here's his specific tweak, the detail that almost nobody teaches anymore. Runyan emphasized a particular grip and hand structure where the lead hand stays firm, but the wrists stay soft, and the club head is allowed to pass, to release, so the loft is delivered fully at the ball. He wanted the toe of the club releasing through impact, not the face held open and dragged. Most amateurs today are taught to hold the face open and drag the handle forward, which delofts the club and shuts the bounce off, the very thing that leaves you fat and thin. Runyan taught the opposite, and he taught it because it worked well enough to destroy Sam Snead over 36 holes. When I read that, it lined up perfectly with what that old gentleman had told me on the practice green, and with what Sarazen had built into the club in 1932. 3 sources, 40 and 90 years apart, all saying the same thing. Stop leaning the shaft. Stop killing the bounce. Let the club do what it was designed to do. So here is Runyan's method in a form you can take to the course this weekend. On your short pitches, set up with your feet close together, most of your weight favoring your lead side and staying there. Ball in the center. Shaft vertical, handle over the ball, not ahead of it. Grip soft. Now make a small, smooth swing where your chest turns back and turns through, and you consciously let the club head swing past your hands into the finish. Feel like the head passes the handle after impact. Let the toe turn over gently. Do not drag, do not lift. Just turn and let it release, and let that wide sole skim the grass. The ball comes off soft, with a little spin, lands, and settles. And the contact feels like almost nothing, because you're not fighting the club anymore. You and Sarazen and Runyan are finally on the same team. I took this to my home course on a quiet weekday morning. Same practice green, where the old man had watched me chunk it 100 times. And I hit 20 pitch shots with Runyan's method, soft hands, neutral shaft, letting the head release. 18 of them nipped clean and checked. 2 were a little heavy, and both of those still rolled up decent, because the bounce skidded me out of trouble instead of digging me into it. 20 for 20 playable. From a man who used to give away 3 or 4 shots a round on exactly these. That's the whole thing. That's what was taken from you, quietly, over years of being sold gear instead of knowledge. A club invented in 1932 to keep you from digging. A method written down in 1979 by a small man who beat giants with it. And one weird setup tweak, standing the shaft up and softening your hands, that puts all of it back in your control for free. I spent years and real money chasing crisp wedges through the pro shop, and the answer was a thing I could have done in my driveway the whole time. That's the part that stays with me. Not the strokes I saved, the years I lost trusting the wrong voices when common sense and a little buried history had the answer all along. If you're the kind of person who'd rather understand your equipment than keep replacing it, who'd rather fix the cause than pay for the symptom, then you already think the way this works. You don't need the newest 60-degree wedge. You need the bounce you already own, switched back on. So let me ask you something specific, and I want you to actually answer this one. How many wedges do you have in your bag right now? And be honest, how many of them do you truly trust from 50 yards? Tell me the number down in the comments. I read them, and I promise you're not the only one who's going to be a little embarrassed by that number. Leave a comment and let me know. And if you want more of this, the real methods that got buried under everything they keep trying to sell you, come along with me. This isn't about one video. It's about taking back the practical knowledge that used to be common sense before it got turned into a product. Next time, I'm going to show you the forgotten putting drill a 1950s champion used with nothing but a coin and a wooden yardstick, the one that fixed his 3 putts in a single afternoon. You already own everything you need for it. Stick with me, and let's keep taking this stuff back, one buried secret at a time. This video showed you why the bounce matters. But inside my membership, the Practical Wisdom Circle, I walk you through the full Runyan bounce method, set up to strike, so you can groove it yourself. And if something isn't clicking, ask me directly, and I'll answer you myself. No bots. You won't be doing it alone either. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. And you can cancel any time. Now that your wedges are crisper, there's one common mistake. Almost everyone gets backwards. And fixing it will change your short game completely. I'll show you exactly how right here. Let's keep going together.